We're back here on CJAD 800. I'm Paul Afalo sitting in for Barry. Tonight, we're talking with film critic Joe Belanger from BlackSheepReviews.com. Joe, how's it going, man? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Paul. It's going very well.
So, you've seen quite a lot of films, I can imagine, in 2012?
I did see a few. I think I counted it up, and this is just first-run theatrical films, not including, any DVD rewatches or films from the past. But I think I saw about 125.
125 brand new films.
About that, yeah.
Wow. I'm trying to think. I was trying to think about this earlier. How many films that I've seen this year in 2012, and I think I've hit a low. I haven't hit that high that I normally would when it comes to films. It's been such a crazy mixed year for me between doing film work and radio work and other work, so I haven't had the chance to go see new films in theaters. I think I went 2 months without seeing a single film in theaters this year.
I had a gap as well, somewhere near the end of November and mid-December, where I realized I hadn't seen anything in like 2 to 3 weeks, which was very strange. But
yeah. Especially coming from a film reviewer who goes to see films regularly. So it's
it was odd that all of a sudden I wasn't seeing anything, but it just so happens like I see a good chunk of my films during the Toronto Film Festival. So I see 40, like a third of the movies in 1 2-week period. So and those tend to come out around Christmas time, around the holidays. So it just happened that I had already seen the movies that were coming out. But
so that works out well then, because then you have other films that you can go see during that time and sort of spread them out kind of nicely if you can.
Exactly. But it was just a strange thing when I found myself in the theater in December thinking, I haven't been at one of these things for a little bit.
All right, so let's start off with your best of 2012, because that's what I'm really curious to know about. What were your favorite films of this past year as we head into the new year?
Absolutely. Just to preface my favorite films of the year, when I try to compile this list, I look at movies that had large impacts on me. So not necessarily what I think are technically the best films of the year, but more so just the films that had either large emotional impacts on me or intelligent effect on me, or even if they're just hysterical. As long as they stay with me and make me want to see them again and again, then that's how I can judge that this film belongs on this list. I keep it alphabetical.
Okay.
To not,
no bias. It's just these are the full top 10. Okay.
So to stick alphabetically, this is a film. The first one that I have on my list is a film called Amour by Michael Haneke, which translates to love, just in case we didn't know. This film comes out in Montreal, I believe, on the 11th of January. It is playing randomly here and there now, and it's a difficult film. It's the story of an elderly couple in their 80s who one of them has a stroke and the other has to take care of the other afterwards. And obviously that's very difficult to get through as a viewer, but it's also a meticulously crafted film that, in my opinion, really demonstrated how simple love could and should be versus all the complications that we add to it in our day-to-day now.
It's one film that I missed this year. I haven't seen it yet, so I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the weekend that I have free to literally probably rent all the films that I've been waiting to see and then actually watch them in one sitting, if it's at all humanly possible.
Well, there's a mixed bag in my list of films that are a little bit more obscure and some that are a little bit more popular. So I'm sure that some of these films you probably have seen, but the next one maybe not as well as is Beasts of the Southern Wild.
Nope, I have not seen it.
This is it's a big indie success this year. It came out of Sundance earlier in the year. It's now available to rent or own on DVD and Blu-ray and so forth. But it basically tells the story of an imagined America where a good chunk of the southern states run the risk of being fully immersed in water post Katrina and polar ice caps melting and so forth. And there are some holdouts who live in these areas who don't want to leave their homes. And one of these holdouts is a little girl who is no more than 8, who really has no choice but to stay there because her father, who has some mental issues and is an alcoholic and is essentially dying, doesn't want to leave. And so she's coming to terms with the fact that her father will soon die and that she has to basically live for herself and find life outside of this area. And it's very creative. And it's led by this brilliant performance by a girl who was no more than 6 at the time. Her name is Cubanzani Wallace, and she actually has good chances of being nominated for an Oscar. It's a very cool film, very different. So I would highly recommend checking that out on DVD now.
Is it available on DVD right now?
It is, yeah. It just came out a couple weeks ago.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm adding this to my list. Luckily, everything's on your website at BlackSheepReviews.com, so I've got it all there, so it's great for me.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next one on your list is The Hunger Games, which is a film I did see.
Great. Now we can talk about something that you've seen. Some people have told me they were a little surprised to see The Hunger Games on my list. There were obviously a lot of big blockbusters this year that people had highly anticipated, and I think really most of them delivered. The Dark Knight Rises, a couple of issues here and there, but people
Yes.
I think were generally happy with it. The Avengers, clearly people were more than impressed with that. And for me, The Hunger Games is, I read the book myself, and I was very excited to see the film, and I love Jennifer Lawrence, and I think they did a really respectable job of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I do highly recommend this is because I love whom this character is aimed at. She is such a better role model than anything from a Twilight book.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, she has love at her feet from two different suitors, but she doesn't really want it. She understands that there are other priorities in life, like taking care of her family and surviving this death game with all these other kids. So I really have a lot of respect for this character and the influence that she can have. She's a very strong young woman. So I love the films. I've seen it 3 times now. So.
Oh wow, I've seen it twice. I rented it when it first came out on Blu-ray, and then I saw it in theaters. And I didn't know what to expect going into it in theaters. I didn't know that there was this whole trilogy of books behind it. And then I went to go see the film, and I liked the film for the story. I liked the film as a filmmaker who enjoys well-shot films and great cinematography. This is what I really enjoyed about the film, and the acting as well. And of course, this is also a relatively unique story. This is a bunch of teenagers and kids murdering one another for sport, which you don't exactly see anywhere. So it's and it was really, really, really well done and very tasteful as well in a lot of ways.
And considering they couldn't really afford an R rating because they would alienate the majority of their audience, I think they were still able to convey a lot of the seriousness and the heinousness of these games within a PG rating as well.
Exactly. Well, it's really interesting to see. I was surprised when it got its PG rating. I was not expecting that, especially even coming out of the film. But I also then went and read the rules and requirements to get all the different ratings, and I'm like, okay, so it falls within that category. But still, you would think, like 15 years ago, this would not be the case.
The actual idea of violence is not so much the issue as perhaps if you're showing blood or swearing a few more times than you should.
Exactly. So the next film on your list is a film that hasn't, I think, been officially released wide yet, The Impossible.
Yeah, it isn't playing in Montreal yet. It comes out also on January 11th, and I highly recommend this film, but it's another film that will be very difficult for people to watch. It's basically telling the story of the true story of a Spanish family that has been changed to an English family in the film, who were on vacation during the 2004 tsunami, and basically this is the story of how they survived and, how they found each other or got through all of the hardships and whatnot. So a good chunk of the film is really just watching them deal with, this disaster and getting through it. So it can be quite difficult to watch, but it's an incredible human endurance story. I've heard some complaints about the film, some people saying that doesn't really encapsulate like the grander disaster that happened. But I tend to disagree. I think that, they focused on this one family. They can't tell everyone's story, right? And by telling this one story, I don't think it's particularly unique. I'm sure other people went through similar experiences. I think that they did as good a job as they could with it. And also you run the risk, essentially it's a disaster movie, right, in the true sense of that definition, and you run the risk of being really offensive, considering how recent this disaster is. But I think they did a good job by focusing on the actual genuine emotions in this family. So I highly recommend this film.
We're going to have more with film critic Joe Belanger from BlackSheepReviews.com just after this here on CJAD.